There's a solution out there to sustainable, safe racing.
That solution could be closer than we think. Dr. Alan Page, a scientist veterinarian at UK, has been researching with his team how to indicate which racehorses are susceptible to life-threatening injuries. He says the indicator can be found in a horse's blood.
So we're using messenger RNA, which comes from blood, is where we're getting it from, as a biomarker for injury risk.
The blood samples they're currently working with come from horses that have already sustained the same fatal injuries that this team is working to prevent.
We can compare injured horses versus non-injured horses to see where those differences are as a danger signal, if you will.
He explained that in the past, this testing has been highly effective in indicating these injuries. Typically, horses appear perfectly normal until they suffer one of these deadly injuries. Dr. Page says that the goal of this research is to allow them to get ahead of injuries instead of kicking these horses off the track.
If a horse is at risk, we don't think that the horse should be scratched. We think that that horse should be looked at more. We can keep those injuries from occurring. Maybe the horse needs some time off. Maybe we need to change something with the training. But we don't get to the point where they have a potentially other career or life-ending injury.
Hoping that this research can contribute to a safer future for all horses.
Going forward, I think the hope is we're part of the solution.
In Lexington, Lucy Bryson, WKYT.